let's say, Jeff, because the thing is that, like you said, the conversation isn't even over. Like, we're looking right now, and at this point, if Steph Curry were to retire today, he would be the second greatest point guard of all time, in our opinions. What does Stephen Curry have to do to surpass Magic Johnson and to put himself at number one? Because I think there's an argument to be made that he could not win another championship, and by the time he retires, we could still be having the conversation of, is Steph Curry the greatest point guard of all time? I think there is a path to get there, but I'm curious as to what you think would have to happen in order for Steph to be in that conversation.
And that's tough.
What is going on? I want to welcome you from Half Court for today, Monday, June 20th, in the year of our Lord 2022. I'm your host, Sean Murphy, alongside one of my best friends, my duo, my partner in crime, my man, Jeff Iafrady. Jeff, happy Monday, man. How you doing?
I'm doing good. We're fresh off the finals, and with that always comes new conversation. And today we're going to get into a very, I don't even want to say controversial, but a very interesting topic, especially one that hits close to home for Pistons fans. So I'm excited.
Absolutely. And Jeff, first of all, let's get this out of the way. The Golden State Warriors won the NBA championship, and a certain someone in this video said that Golden State would win, and a certain other person, and we're not going to name names, might have picked the Boston Celtics. So I'll go out and speak on behalf of that person who got it wrong and say the Warriors played pretty well, and that guy looks dumb. Whoever that is,
Yeah,
we don't know
who that is.
We don't know who it could be. We have no clue, no idea.
But some other guy picked the Warriors in 6. I like that guy.
Yeah. Some would think a broken clock can be right twice a day. But anyway, Jeff, oh my gosh! But Jeff, there's a lot to talk about after that finals, because first of all, anytime the Larry O'Brien Trophy is presented, there is legacy and there is significance behind it. The game of basketball writ a new chapter and crowned a new champion for the 75th season. And in my opinion, there was no better finals that we could have had to celebrate the 75th season. And through that, Jeff, we saw the MVP performance of Steph Curry. And Steph Curry is now a 4-time champion. He's made it to the finals 6 times, and of those 6 times, have won the championship 4 of them. And this time, did it without Kevin Durant. Did it perhaps with his worst supporting cast that he's won with. And he's starting to really enter himself into a pantheon of conversations that he was not considered to be in before. And in particular, Jeff, Steph Curry is rising people's ranks of the all-time point guard list, specifically passing one Isiah Thomas in a lot of people's books. Now, Jeff, you and I know a guy named Neil Rule who will not entertain this conversation, who said before the finals he won't entertain this conversation. However, I would be remiss, Jeff, to say that there are few people that have played the point guard position in the history of the league that are better than Steph Curry.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you, where are you sitting at after this finals? How does your view of Stephen Curry change? And where would you rank him on the list of all-time point guards?
I mean, even before this, I think his legacy was already, solidified, I guess, in a way. He was a top 3 point guard, but another finals, obviously win, another championship ring, but also that another final, and now a first finals MVP, which I don't look too much into. Like, even the finals where Iguodala won MVP, it was clear Steph should have won that MVP.
Right,
but again, it matters when you really put the accolades up and you look at these players. With Steph Curry, he's past Isiah to me, and I love Isiah Thomas. You see I got a Pistons thing right behind me. So clearly, Isiah is very close, dearly to my heart. I love Isiah.
How dare you, Jeff? You mother son of a... You go against our guy like that. No. I'm kidding. Totally kidding.
No, that's honestly how it is, though, in a way. But also, you have to look at 2 different eras, man. And I hate comparing eras. That's always been my thing. I hate having those types of discussions because Isiah Thomas at the time, like the definition of a point guard, and he talked about this on the Bottom Line when he went on the show for an interview, 2 to 4 on Woodward Sports. He talked about point guards during my time. You were asked to, make others better by, assists and being, scoring points. Like, he was always a 20-point scorer, or close to. but the double doubles, man, like this guy, back-to-back finals wins. He led his team in points and assists. That doesn't get talked about, but
Right.
also another part of it is his defense. I mean, defensively, he was so underrated, even for being a small guard. You can go check the stats and just the tape, man. Like he was a dog. That's why he was labeled as that guy in Isiah
Mhm.
Thomas, the heart and soul of Detroit. But with Steph Curry, though, I mean, this is a guy, and I'm just laying up the accolades. Like, obviously, he's an 8-time All-Star. And I want to add this before I go into Steph Curry. Isiah Thomas played 13 years in the NBA. Steph Curry's
Mhm.
played 13 years. So, like, that's also another point of this I don't think is completely fair. Like, Isiah Thomas retired right as Steph Curry just won his championship
Right.
this year. So, Steph, longevity-wise, of course, I think at the end, people will more, be okay with putting him there. But I don't like it. I don't think it's fair, but again, this is what with the conversation we have to have. So I would put him above Isiah Thomas. If you look at it, man, like obviously he's the greatest shooter. We know this, but it's really besides that. Like the guy's averaged over 30 points twice in the regular season. Like
Mhm.
he's a point guard. He's a two guard disguised in a point guard's body, and
Yeah.
that's what point guards are nowadays. So
Yeah.
it's a tough conversation to have because you're comparing eras. But
Well,
if you want to just look at the player pound for pound and their accolades, I don't know how you can't have Steph Curry above Isiah Thomas. I really
yeah.
can't.
Well, and Jeff, to your point, it's such a difficult conversation because they're such different players. I
Right.
mean, as you talk about, Steph Curry just finished his 12th season, Isaiah Thomas still has 170 career games over Steph. So Steph hasn't quite reached that amount of time that Isaiah was on the court. But I think the first of all, you have to look at Isaiah Thomas, and one of the things that people are going to look at right away, if you were to solely look at these guys on the stat sheet, people would look at Isaiah Thomas's 3-point shooting, and that's where the questions would start. But Jeff, I think that's where the eras conversation comes in because let's be honest with ourselves, Jeff. It was a point where Isaiah Thomas, the most amount of threes he averaged
I was
taking
gonna,
in a
yeah.
game in
How
his
many?
entire career, his career high in attempts
Only what,
per
two?
season for threes was 2.5. If
Yeah, it just
Steph took 2.5 threes, that would mean he would only be playing 5 minutes per game. Like Steph's averaging almost 13 threes a game at his peak. So the
yeah.
game that they play is incredibly different. But also, I think one player that I see Isaiah Thomas in a very similar regard to is Jimmy Butler. And what I mean by that, even though they play different positions, they are different stylistically in certain ways. But I think what makes those guys special is because those guys as players, they might not be the most talented, but they're the most competitive and they're dogs and they go
Yeah.
out there and they affect a game and affect winning because they know what it takes to win basketball games. And very similar to Jimmy Butler, Isaiah Thomas was that kind of guy who would get on you and would hold the standard. And if you were to come into that team, you would have to do what it takes to win basketball games. And so Isaiah Thomas, he had moments where he took the game over scoring the basketball. But like you said, it wasn't always about scoring. He wasn't a guy who would average 20 points a game. He could, but that wasn't the way that his team was going to win. That wasn't the way that Detroit teams were going to win. So
Right.
with Isaiah Thomas, I think that's where, like you said, when we're having the conversation about eras, that's where you have to be honest about him. Now, like you said, you look at all the accolades of Steph Curry, and the list is expansive. But just to be the devil's advocate for the Zeke side of it and to have that other side of the conversation, Zeke's awards are pretty remarkable himself. 12-time NBA All-Star, played in the league 13 years. So he only missed the NBA All-Star game one season, and it was his
Yeah.
last year, which he dealt with injury issues that year. In addition, he won 7 awards throughout his career, including Finals MVP, including being on the 50th and the 75th greatest players of all time award. Won a couple All-Star MVPs. The guy's done a lot of different things throughout his time as well. But Jeff, Steph Curry's the greatest shooter of all time. There's just things that he does on a basketball court that, as great as Isaiah Thomas was, he just can't do.
Yeah, and I think one thing that gets overlooked because he's such a great shooter is his finishing and his ball handling. Like he's still like as a ball handler and as a finisher up there in terms of all-time point guards. Like that
Mhm.
gets overlooked because he's such a great shooter, but it's really the totality of all those things. Like it's the shooting, it's the the ability to create space, it's
Mhm.
the making his teammates. He's a great passer. I just don't think that's his strength. You talked
Right.
about it. I mean, the guy averaged 30 points, over 30 points twice in his career. Like, he can clearly score the basketball. So they're different players. But to your point, like, when you get to these conversations, it's always about the flash. It's always
Right.
about what Steph Curry does. So I think solidifying this championship, because you got to understand too, like, it takes a different type of player. Kevin Durant joins your team and you're still getting double teamed. Like, that has to mean something. Like, they have to account for that man. Like, yes, KD might be the best player, but Steph is the number one, defensive, at least assignment. Like, you're going to look at
Yeah.
going to the game looking at Steph Curry. So that matters as well. So
Yeah.
I get the counter arguments, but Steph, you talked about the accolades. I mean, as a player himself, man, like, he's just, by the time he's done, you could argue he might be the best point guard. I think Magic will always be the best point guard just because of but in terms of small guards,
Yeah.
like, if we're talking best small guard of all time, I've got to go with Steph Curry.
Well, and here's the thing, man. The scary part is that this team very much could not be done. We could be in a situation where this time next year, we're talking about how the Golden State Warriors repeated again. We could be talking about how
Yeah,
Steph Curry got another Finals MVP. And that's the thing about Stephen Curry, is that there's no player in the history of the game that you have to truly guard at three-quarter court at any given time. And
yeah.
I'm serious. Like, if you
No,
are
you're
if
right.
you are towards the end of a game, you cannot afford to leave that man open in the full court at any point in time. You have to respect him because he is that lethal of a shooter. And so now, especially, you look at what he did and what his presence did to the Boston Celtics, who you and I had
Mm,
talked about for so long and so much depth about how scary of a defensive team the Boston Celtics were. By the end of that series, Jeff, that team didn't have an answer. And quite frankly, it's shown there isn't an answer for Steph,
no.
because not only can he make it from literally the half court line, but you talk about driving to the paint. Isaiah was great at that. Steph might be just as good. He's at the
Yeah.
point where he might be the best at that in his entire career. And that's the stuff that's terrifying, is that you really have to respect him at every single facet, because
Right.
we even saw Stephen Curry make key stops and key plays defensively against Jason Tatum in the finals. I mean, truly, what's the argument against Stephen Curry anymore? Because he's starting to shut everybody up.
Yeah, and I think another thing you have to add too, in respect to Isaiah, because if you've played through the '80s and you're still in this conversation in the early '90s, and you're still in the conversation for the second greatest point guard, yeah, like, you and Steph Curry, and this is the mold now. NBA players are just so more developed. They've
Mhm.
gotten better. Like, the 3-point shot is so important now. There's better athletes, and I think for Isaiah, it's a compliment to still be in this conversation. I think that's something
Absolutely.
you have to tip your hat off to him. I mean, for what he was asked to do at the time, they're very similar players in terms of what they can do. In terms, you can take away the shooting, but just maybe he doesn't have the dog Isaiah had, but just talked about
Mhm.
the finishing, the ball handling. Like, people just underestimate Isaiah Thomas because he played in the '80s, but he deserves some credit, man. So for still being in these conversations like 30, 40 years later, it's impressive.
Yeah, without a doubt. Now, let's say, Jeff, because the thing is that, like you said, the conversation isn't even over. Like, we're looking right now, and at this point, if Steph Curry were to retire today, he would be the second greatest point guard of all time in our opinions. What does Stephen Curry have to do to surpass Magic Johnson and to put himself at number one? Because I think there's an argument to be made that he could not win another championship, and by the time he retires, we could still be having the conversation of, is Steph Curry the greatest point guard of all time? I think there is a path to get there, but I'm curious as to what you think would have to happen in order for Steph to be in that conversation.
And that's tough. Just Matt, because we talk about accolades, that's what gives Steph the slight edge over Isaiah. But we talk about accolades, like Magic Johnson, 3-time MVP, 5-time champ. I
Mhm.
mean, this guy, 3 times Finals MVP. Like,
Mhm.
I just think when you're going to have those conversations, like, and the only thing you really have now, I guess, if you're talking about it, is the shooting ability. But Magic Johnson, to me, it will always be the greatest point guard. Like, Steph would have to win. I mean, even if he wins another championship,
He could
they
win
would be
another MVP
they
as
would be
well, though.
tied. And
Remember,
I'm
don't you forget, at the beginning of this season, a quarter of the way through, who was the
Oh
consensus
yeah.
MVP candidate? It was Stephen Curry. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, this is also one of the first times we saw a guy win an MVP in the All-Star game, in the finals, and then also, I mean, he won it in the Western Conference Finals too, but we're not going to
Yeah,
count
it's
that,
pretty.
especially not in these conversations. We're not going to count that. But are you telling me that if Stephen Curry wins one more MVP and two more championships and one more Finals MVP, that at the very least that conversation becomes really uncomfortable? Because I think right now it becomes a little uncomfortable, even with the greatness that Magic's had. I think this conversation is still very much up for debate at one of who's the greatest point guard of all time. And I love Magic Johnson, but Stephen Curry, I think he's entered in the top 10 players of all time as well. Like
Oh yeah.
I saw Bill Simmons say that, and I'm inclined to agree. Just the more I think about it, he's got to be top 10 all time. Got to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think top 10, no doubt. In terms of
Mhm.
passing Magic, again, I mean, if he wins another one, gets another MVP, like, of course, it's going to be a conversation. I just think people are so enamored by, especially Magic, like being the first, like one of the first real superstars. Like that, that's
Right.
always going to leave that nostalgia in people's minds. But
Yeah.
again, I think that's what makes sports so great because these conversations are never going to be ending. Like Steph would have to win more, significantly more, to really solidify himself as the number one point guard. But we'll see. I think he can do it with Golden State. That's obviously they're the best position to do it for him. But he's going to have to, if they win another and he wins another Finals MVP, gets another MVP, then certainly yes, we'll start to have these conversations.
Yeah, without a doubt. But the question is, what do you think? Do you think Isiah Thomas is not getting enough love from us? Do you think Magic Johnson is very much going to hold on to that position forever? Or do you believe that Stephen Curry has reigned himself as the new greatest point guard of all time? Let us know in the comment section down below. But also, be sure to follow my guy on Twitter at Jeff Iafrady, as well as myself at Sean Half Court, and go over to Woodward Sports, where yesterday Jeff and I had our first video upload on there, where we will have a video each and every weekend on the Woodward Sports channel. So if you're a fan of From Half Court content and want more of it, head over to Woodward Sports. But for now, we want to thank y'all so much for tuning in, and we will catch y'all next time from Half Court. Be sure to subscribe and join down below to be a member today.
Join.